He bought a truck at a government auction in Indiana, paid what it was listed for, drove it home, and had no idea he'd just acquired a vehicle built to spy on people. That man is Clinton Chitwood, the rural equipment dealer behind CNC Equipment, a channel that started as documentation of his real business and became something else entirely once his viewers found out what was actually sitting in his yard. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly how that truck ended up at auction, what Clinton found inside it, and why the story reveals something about the surplus military market that most people never think about. Brown County, Indiana is the kind of place that doesn't produce a lot of famous names. It's rural, wooded, and small. It's also the kind of place where a man builds a business around heavy equipment not because it sounds interesting, but because equipment is what's around. Clinton Chitwood grew up in that environment. Before there was a YouTube channel, there was CNC Equipment, an actual working operation dealing in surplus vehicles, military machinery, and heavy gear. This was not a content creator who found a niche. This was a working dealer who eventually pointed a camera at what he was already doing. That distinction matters more than it might seem. Clinton's audience didn't grow because he learned to present things for YouTube. It grew because he wasn't performing. The trucks were real. The purchases were real. The work on those trucks was real. Everything the camera captured was already happening before the camera showed up. The military surplus world is a specific one. Vehicles come out of federal inventories through a structured government process. Trucks, heavy equipment, generators, trailers, anything the military no longer needs gets routed through auction channels and sold to civilians. Some of it is beaten, some of it is remarkable. All of it has a history that doesn't come with the purchase price. Clinton built his knowledge of that world over years. He knew what a real M35A2 was worth. He knew what the Bob Deuce variants went for. He knew the difference between a vehicle that had been properly maintained through its service life and one that had been run into the ground. That knowledge was the foundation of the business, and it's also what made the spy truck discovery so disorienting. He thought he knew what he was looking at. He didn't. And here's what the comments kept asking. And here's the answer they never got, until now. Government surplus auctions are not dramatic events. They're inventory clearances. A federal agency decides it no longer needs something. That item gets cataloged, and it gets sold. The buyer shows up, pays, and leaves. There is no ceremony. Clinton has attended enough of these to know the routine. You look at what's available, you evaluate condition, you estimate what the work will cost, and you decide whether the number makes sense. The description attached to a vehicle at surplus auction is functional, not exhaustive. It tells you what the vehicle is, roughly what condition it's in, and what category it falls under. It does not tell you everything the vehicle has been used for. The truck Clinton purchased looked like what it was listed as, a military surplus vehicle, the kind he'd dealt with before. The body style was consistent with other trucks he'd seen come through similar auctions. He paid a fair price for what he believed he was buying, transported it back to Indiana, and began the process of evaluating it the way he evaluates everything that comes through his operation. That evaluation is where the story changes. When Clinton started working through the vehicle, he began finding things that didn't belong in a standard military truck. Not broken things, not missing things, additional things. Equipment that had been built into the vehicle structure, systems that were not factory installed, and the unmistakable signs of professional modification, the kind of modification that doesn't happen in a motor pool. The truck had been built out. The interior had been converted. It was designed to look, from the outside, like exactly what it appeared to be, a surplus military vehicle. That was the point. That was the entire operational logic of it. A truck that blends in is a truck that can park anywhere and attract no attention. But here's the part that changes everything about what you just heard. Surveillance vehicles built for government use are not improvised. They are purpose-engineered, fitted by specialists, and designed to operate for extended periods without being identified for what they actually are. The exterior is the cover. The interior is the function. What Clinton found inside the truck was consistent with that kind of professional build-out. The vehicle had been modified to house surveillance equipment, cameras, monitoring systems, and infrastructure designed to capture and transmit information from a static or mobile position. The modifications were not amateur work. They were built to be hidden behind the truck's standard exterior appearance. This is a vehicle with a double identity. On the outside, it reads as military surplus, the same category as hundreds of other trucks that pass through government auctions every year. On the inside, it operated as something else entirely. Nobody at the auction told Clinton that. The listing didn't specify it. He found out the way people find out things in the equipment business, by getting into the vehicle and looking at what was actually there. The question that immediately follows this discovery is a legal and practical one. What does a civilian do when they legally purchase a government surveillance vehicle through a proper auction process? The vehicle was sold, the title transferred. Clinton owned it, but the equipment inside it represented a version of the truck's history that raised real questions about how it had ended up in a civilian auction in the first place. Surplus processes have oversight, but they are not infallible. Items that reach the auction stage have been reviewed and cleared for civilian sale. What that review catches, and what it sometimes doesn't, is a legitimate subject of discussion in the surplus community. Clinton hadn't done anything wrong. He'd bought a vehicle through a legal government process. What that vehicle turned out to be was the system's problem to account for, not his. Most people who know this story stop here, but the real story starts right now. The CNC equipment audience watches because the content is real. These are actual vehicles, actual purchases, actual work. When Clinton put out the content around the surveillance truck, his viewers didn't engage with it as entertainment. They engaged with it as information. The surplus military vehicle community is small and knowledgeable. People in it know what standard military modifications look like. They know what aftermarket work looks like, and they know what professional government installation looks like. The reaction from that community when Clinton documented what he found was immediate and specific, because the people watching understood what they were seeing. The wider audience, the people who follow CNC equipment without deep knowledge of the surplus world, had a different reaction. For them, the truck confirmed something they already suspected, that the government's relationship with its own equipment is not always as tidy as the paperwork suggests. The idea that a surveillance vehicle could travel through a standard civilian auction, complete and operational, without that fact being prominently disclosed lands differently depending on what you already believe about government accountability. Both reactions are understandable, and both miss something important. The surplus system works, broadly speaking. The overwhelming majority of military equipment that reaches civilian auction is exactly what it says it is. Trucks, generators, trailers, vehicles that were built for operational use and are now genuinely surplus. Clinton has processed hundreds of vehicles across his career without encountering anything like the surveillance truck. This was not a routine find. It was an anomaly within a system that, most of the time, functions as intended. What made it notable was not that it exposed a conspiracy. It's that it illustrated a gap, a real and specific gap between what surplus means administratively and what a decommissioned vehicle sometimes still contains when it leaves government custody. One phone call, one conversation, that's all it took to change the direction of everything. The surveillance truck story gets the attention, but it exists within a much larger operation that Clinton built over years in rural Indiana, and that operation is what makes the story possible in the first place. CNC equipment is a working business, not a YouTube front, not a brand built on content. Clinton and his operation buy and sell real equipment, restore vehicles, fabricate parts, and operate in the heavy machinery world on a practical, day-to-day basis. The channel documents that work, including the finds, the failures, the decisions, and the results. Military surplus vehicles have always been a core part of that operation. The M35A2, the Bob Deuce, various military trailers and support vehicles. Clinton has worked through all of it. Some of what he buys gets restored to operational condition. Some of it gets parted out. Some of it gets modified for civilian use. The business is about recognizing value in equipment that the government or military has moved on from, and turning that recognition into income. Brown County, Indiana is not a place that typically produces significant business stories. It's rural, it's quiet, and it runs on a different economic rhythm than the market's most business coverage focuses on. Clinton's operation is a reminder that the heavy equipment trade exists everywhere, runs on real expertise, and supports working businesses in places that don't often appear on anyone's radar. That's part of what his audience responds to. There's a version of YouTube that celebrates wealth, status, and consumption. CNC equipment is not that version. It's a man with specific knowledge about a specific industry, doing real work in a real place, and showing people what that looks like. The surveillance truck didn't create that appeal. It amplified an appeal that was already there. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. The surveillance truck is not the only unusual vehicle to have passed through civilian government auctions. The surplus system processes an enormous volume of equipment, and within that volume, anomalies occur. Vehicles are sometimes sold with equipment still installed that should have been removed. Modifications are sometimes present that the listing doesn't account for. The review process that's supposed to catch these things is a human process, which means it produces human errors. Clinton's situation was unusual but not unique in kind, only in degree. The scale of the build-out, the sophistication of the surveillance equipment, and the operational purpose of the vehicle made his find more dramatic than the standard surplus anomaly. But the underlying dynamic, a civilian buyer discovering that a government vehicle contains more than its listing suggests, happens with enough regularity that experienced surplus buyers account for it. What most buyers find when this happens is equipment that was inadvertently left behind. Radio gear, spare parts, manuals, installation hardware, benign. What Clinton found was not benign. It was purpose-built, professionally installed, and operational. That's the distinction that put his find in a different category. The question of what to do with such a vehicle is genuinely complicated. The equipment inside has value, both intrinsic and informational. How Clinton handled that, what he disclosed, what he retained, what he removed, is a decision that the surplus community watched closely, because it set an informal precedent for how a responsible buyer navigates a find that goes beyond what any auction description anticipated. He never talked about all of this publicly, until now. Put the surveillance truck aside for a moment. What Clinton Chitwood has built in Brown County, Indiana, represents something that gets less attention than it deserves. The heavy equipment market in rural America is substantial. It operates on expertise that takes years to develop, relationships that take longer, and a practical knowledge of machinery that cannot be acquired from a course or a certification. Clinton's operation runs on all three of those things. The channel is what makes it visible. The business is what makes it real. Military surplus specifically sits in an interesting position in that market. The equipment is built to standards that civilian manufacturing rarely matches. M35A2 trucks, for example, are known for longevity and repairability in a way that has made them attractive to buyers long after their military service ended. A properly maintained and restored surplus vehicle can have a second life that outlasts its first. Clinton understands this in a way that's practical rather than sentimental. He doesn't collect vehicles because they're interesting, though they are. He deals in them because they represent value that the market hasn't always recognized. His ability to spot that value, to look at a vehicle coming out of a government auction and understand what it is, what it needs, and what it's worth after that work, is the actual skill at the center of the business. The spy truck is the story that spread, but the skill is the thing that built the channel, and it's the thing that will keep building it long after any single video stops circulating. What happened next is the reason this story spread across the internet. K&C Equipment remains active. Clinton continues to post content around his equipment finds and operations, and the channel draws an audience that follows the work rather than the spectacle. That's a more durable position than it might appear. Channels built on single viral moments tend to contract around those moments. Channels built on consistent expertise tend to expand around that expertise. The surveillance truck gave Clinton's channel a wider footprint. It brought in viewers who wouldn't have found rural Indiana heavy equipment content through normal discovery. Some of those viewers stayed because what they found once they arrived was substantive. Others moved on. That's the natural cycle of any content that breaks through a niche boundary. What Clinton returned to after that story ran its course was the work. Equipment finds, auction purchases, fabrication, the practical, unglamorous, expertise-heavy content that his core audience came for in the first place. In 2025, that kind of content operates in a YouTube environment that has increasingly rewarded authenticity over production, not because the algorithm changed, but because viewers have developed a tolerance for polished emptiness and a genuine appetite for content that knows something. Clinton's channel has always known something. That's its competitive position, and it hasn't changed. The surveillance truck was the moment that made the wider YouTube world aware of CNC equipment, but Clinton Chitwood was doing this before that moment, and he's still doing it after. What this story actually is, underneath the spy truck angle, is a story about expertise in a place that doesn't get credited for it. Clinton Chitwood built a real business in rural Indiana by knowing things that most people don't know and being willing to show that knowledge on camera. The surveillance truck happened because his expertise put him in a position to recognize what he'd found and to document it in a way that his audience could understand and engage with. That's not luck. That's the result of years of work in a specific industry that rewards exactly that kind of depth. E&C equipment is still operating, still posting, and still doing what it was doing before any of this became a story. The next chapter is the same as the last one. Equipment comes in, work gets done, and the camera captures it. The question worth sitting with is this: if Clinton had been a less experienced buyer, someone who didn't know what standard military modifications look like and couldn't recognize professional surveillance installation when he saw it, that truck probably gets parted out or resold without anyone ever knowing what was inside it. Would you buy a government surplus vehicle without knowing what's been done to it? Or would that uncertainty alone keep you away from the auction entirely?